Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Salma Avdic with the American Marketing Association, and I will be your moderator for today's webcast, which is in partnership with Sprinklr. And our topic for today is dancing with robots, and we'll be discussing the future of AI in marketing. So before we get to our topic, I do want to cover some housekeeping items or reminders if this is not your first AMA webcast. So our session is being recorded today and will be made available later on this afternoon on demand. We also encourage you all to continue this conversation on social, and you can reference hashtag Sprinklr when tweeting about this webcast. And if you have any questions, whether they're technical or content related, please feel free to ask them at any point. You can use our chat area, which is located to the left. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Marshall Kirkpatrick, who is the Senior Director of Influencer and Analyst Relations at Sprinklr, who will officially get us started.
Thanks, Selma. Hello, everyone. This is Marshall Kirkpatrick. I am Senior Director of Influencer and Analyst Relations over at Sprinklr. If you're not familiar with Sprinklr, we are the market's leading platform for social media management and much more for the enterprise. And I have been admiring Stowe Boyd's work for more than a decade. I was delighted recently when Sprinklr data told me that Stowe is the thought leader most central at the intersection of marketing and the future of work. I think you'll really enjoy hearing from Stowe today as well. Over at Sprinklr, we use our own AI technology in our marketing every day. I use it, for example, to monitor our network of partners at scale. But as you'll hear Stowe explain, AI that is used in marketing today is just the beginning of what's to come. I hope after today's webinar you will go and check out Stowe's excellent newsletter, which is at workfutures.org. I was just reading it again this morning before this webinar, and as always, my brain is lit up from all the good research that it contains. I recommend it highly. I hope you'll also be inspired today by Stowe's smart take on this topic. And I'm also excited that we're going to have a blog post from Stowe with even more details up on the excellent Sprinklr blog next week. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Please feel free to ask questions of Stowe. And Stowe, thanks again so much for working with us on this. Take it away.
Well, thanks, Marshall. I really appreciate that. Well, I'm here today to talk about the future of AI in marketing. And with the subtitle, you can see that I'm using a subtext here or a metaphor of learning to dance with the robots. And I'll be getting into that in more detail. I'm going to start with a proviso, though. I'm not really a marketer. And I approach this from a non-marketing angle since my primary obsession is the ecology of work and the anthropology of the future. But clearly, marketing falls in that general area. And my primary task today is to put AI in marketing in perspective at a macro level, and then to zoom into some details. We're at the edge of a civilization-changing collection of new technologies, so disruptive that some have begun to call this the fourth industrial revolution. And that AI is one of the central elements of that transformation, along with other technologies like 5G, exponentially smaller and faster chips, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and new breakthroughs in energy. And learning to dance with the robots, as you can see in the image. Anyway, it's kind of a huge mess, and everything's interrelated to each other. So it's very difficult actually to unthread AI from all those other things, because they are in fact all happening to us at the same time. Carlota Perez tells us in this quote that we face a transformation of nearly everything from top to bottom, and of course including marketing. But when you change everything all at once, some things wind up changed so much that you'd hardly recognize them. And I'm betting that is going to be the case with marketing. So we should brace ourselves for the roller coaster ride ahead of us, especially those who are in the middle of the marketing world. How big is this going to be? Gartner says AI business value will reach $3 trillion by 2022. But that's just money. It doesn't really tell you anything about the impact on us, but it's probably a pretty good proxy. In other words, something that is $4 trillion is going to have a really large, whopping impact on the economy, and that means on us as people living in that world. This is a chart called the Vibrancy Index that was created by people at Stanford and some other universities. And it's a pretty good proxy showing this sort of exponential growth. If you look from 2010 to 2015 in particular, over this entire period, it's gone up 7x, the impact, the importance, the vibrancy, meaning how often people talk about it, how commonly you have it in VC calls with investors and so on. It's a nearly vertical growth from 10 to 15, and we're expecting the 2018 Vibrancy Index to be coming out quite soon. We'll have to wait and see, but my estimate, my guess is it's probably going to go nearly vertical for a while. So it's a huge explosion. So this is an indication of AI finding its way into every niche, in every industry, in every business. Research shows today only 20% of those surveyed have adopted one or more AI-related technologies at scale or in a core part of their business. People are still just experimenting. Most companies are just experimenting. 10% only report adopting more than 2 technologies, and only 9% have reported adopting machine learning. That's a very slow ramping up. However, the danger is that companies may wait too long. They may wind up hopelessly behind their competitors since there's a very long ramp-up time to get started at all. Companies have to spend 12 months, 18 months, 24 months just to get a baseline, a collection of efforts in line, hiring the right resources, determining what kinds of experiments to run before they can try to scale this up and roll it out. So what might happen is people that delay and defer that, they're not in a situation where they can accelerate that initial startup. And as a result, their competitors might gain a strategic advantage and first mover advantage. They might never be able to catch up again. There's a great article in Harvard Business Review this month, which I cite it and discuss at length in the upcoming post at Sprinklr's blog that goes into some detail about that. We also know from research that one of the first places that companies choose to invest is sort of the most core operation of the core operations of the business, which is sales and marketing. So we're seeing a lot of people push, a lot of companies pushing ahead in that regard, and we should see that sort of across the board. We should expect that. So I want to talk a little bit about different ways that AI is likely to transform marketing. And I'm going to zoom into each of these areas. First, AI and data. So that's the first thing that most people think about when they think about AI, its ability to crunch the numbers better than people can. AI and workflow, how AI will change the way work gets done because of its ability to cause us to rethink how we do what we're doing. And finally, how AI might change the actual work, the tasks that marketers do. So I'm going to get into detail in each of these areas. If I can find my button here. So with regard to data, with all those other technologies that we've talked about that are part of the fourth industrial revolution that we're going through, like the Internet of Things, massive use of new sensors, all sorts of additional ways to find more touch points with the increasingly digital customers out there. There's a huge surge of data, and as a result, new ways, mechanisms, obviously, through AI to analyze that. And ultimately, that's going to lead to the possibility of micro-targeting down to the individual in real time. As we have more and more data that individuals are willing to share to have a deeper and richer experience with companies that they trust and want to be involved with, it's possible that we can get way down to very fine-grained interactions. So AI will become invaluable to marketers who are trying to make that transformation into digital connections, these hyper-connected consumers who, for example, might continuously redefine value when they're comparing prices online. Think about people looking for hotel rooms or trying to buy that Christmas present. And particularly when browsing in a non-digital store, that could lead to dynamic pricing schemes, which is relatively difficult to imagine doing in any kind of scaled fashion without AI actually interacting directly with people as they're moving around on pages and being shown things to potentially purchase or potentially find a new pitch about purchasing. So we're going to see a great more deal of dynamism as we're able to collect this data and then analyze it and then hand over to the AIs the possibility of conducting an interaction with the customer. That's one of the sort of minority report kind of messages, the ones that very quickly come to mind. I think the other things I'm talking about in this section, like workflow changes and the job of marketing, might be a little more of a stretch, but certainly they're equally as important and maybe relative to the individuals who are acting as marketers, maybe actually more important on a personal level. So when AI starts to meet the marketers, they must learn to dance with the robots. What do I really mean by that? Well, consider the scenario above, the individual being pitched dynamically generated prices and offerings. The impact of changes arising from such experimentation, trying to find out what works and what doesn't, that could include, and is likely to include, rethinking workflows in the business. These changes could include breaking down siloed organizational groups. So instead of having developers, marketing, manufacturing, and retail management separated, those people from those different groups might be pulled into ad hoc working groups or long-term working groups around the development and operations of an AI-driven project to provide a capability of that sort. And so that means, in a sense, that a company that has been thinking about its work vertically with a bunch of silos and silo organizations may find itself being horizontalized, which is something that we're seeing in other areas where new kind of platform technologies come in. So what that means is people working on this initiative might think of themselves over time less as marketing people and more as people that are involved in a particular mechanism of interaction with a customer group. So the difficulties of change management, which we know all about, right? We know that a lot of change management is very difficult in organizations and so on. So that means that the change management involved here. Force means that people have to buy into the theory and practice of new kinds of cooperative work. And they have to work hard to become more flexible in a context that could be rapidly evolving. So this is going to put a lot of stress on the individuals and the organization as a whole, and the whole notion of marketing. People have to become more flexible. It means they have to learn new skills, new tools, and they have to scale up their knowledge, obviously, of these AI tools and how they work, and also new ways of thinking, because we have to think of AI potentially as another colleague, not just a black box. I mean, you might be in a situation where the AI is not just producing some fancy charts for you or grinding out some set of numbers. It might actually be tasking you to do the next step in some project list of tasks. And so you'll have to accept that just the way you do now with team members in the projects you're working on already. So we might have to get past this notion that the AI is just a black box with inputs and outputs. You know, in effect, we have to think of it as a colleague. And the dancing part, the interaction between humans and machines is going to become hypercritical. So that means sometimes the job of marketing, quote unquote, parts of the job of marketing will be automated, and other parts will still be done by people, but the handoffs have to be coordinated, orchestrated very carefully so that things don't stall, things don't slow down. Especially when the AI is working at AI speed, people might have to find out that they'll have to change their pace of work, at least the parts of their work that deals with dealing with AI. And so you have to consider that new data can be captured, will be captured, and that has to find its way to the right person. And determining who is the right person might be very challenging, because to begin with, the company may not have had such data in the past at all. So determining who has to deal with it today when we didn't have it last week is itself one of those things that's going to impact the workflow of the business. And lastly, it means that marketers may sometimes have to learn a new dance step, something that doesn't feel like or look like work that marketers did a year ago or even a week ago. But we will have to learn those new steps, new rhythms, and new songs, and we're going to probably have to learn that really quickly. So let's get into AI and the job of marketing. I mean, to begin with, we all have a tendency to think about the impact of AI as saying, oh, well, this will be great. I'll be able to offload the unglamorous and repetitive work to some AI tool, like crunching numbers on a new email marketing campaign instead of manually having to do it. Or potentially they may automatically create a deck so you could go give the presentation. But the reality is it's going to reach into the creative side of things. So one of the consistent refrains that we hear very commonly in the arguments pro and con about the impact that AI may have on the world of work is some people want to somehow segregate the creative things that human beings do and say, and simply assert that AI will never be as creative as human beings are capable of being. But we have increasing data that shows that that's just not the case. And so I've got a couple of examples, and this is just the smallest of examples, honestly, of pulling things to give a few indicators of how AI is going to reach into things that we might have considered sacrosanct, things that only human beings could do. And I'm going to show you things that are already in the market. I'm not even talking about futures. I'm talking about things that are available now and have been available in some cases for years. So for example, this product copy, was written by a AI-based product called Index that relies on narrative science's Quill technology. And so what it's done is it's gone off and read a bunch of stuff about Elmer's glue all, actually, it should say. And it generated this product copy based on the notion of how many words it wanted, that it was going to go in a catalog or was going to go on an e-commerce site or something. And you read this and you realize it's just like what a human being would produce. I mean, of course, it's just product copy of some glue product, but still, if you have this thing and you point it at 500 products, it can populate your entire e-commerce site having to do with, I don't know, let's say carpenter's tools and gear. And so a human being just doesn't have to do that anymore. And this is something that human beings would have had to have done only a few years ago. And of course, this is not the only example. There are dozens of companies that are doing things quite similar to this, like newspapers for the last several years have been generating news stories about things like high school baseball scores, box score kind of things, or reporting on local politics or so on. And it's the same sort of thing. It looks like copy that would have been written by a person. It's not really differentiated. Let me jump here. So JukeDeck is a fascinating company. It has used AI to generate a large library of royalty-free editable music that can act as the starting point for videos, ads, or other creative marketing work. And I won't go through this and click it and play the music, but you might want to, because it's actually kind of interesting to go listen to, say, for example, electro folk, and it sounds just like a jingle that somebody would put, on television for some kind of alternative tea that you might drink or something. And of course, instead of paying a single composer, $10,000 to make maybe 3 themes for a potential ad, you pay the JukeDeck guys a certain amount of money, and you pick from thousands of tracks, and you get to change it and edit it to tweak it a little to be exactly the way you want, and you only pay a very small amount of money for that. It's a tenth or 100th or 1,000th of what you might have to pay for a human being to do it, and it's not John Coltrane, it's not necessarily Beethoven, but it's a jingle for television. How good does it have to get anyway? But it's pretty good. It sounds like a human being composed it. And my favorite example here is this is imaginary models. These are imagined reality, as they call it. IRMAS has generated these complex 3-dimensional models. And I only picked 2 here, Carl and Kenzie. But they have literally dozens or hundreds of these models that you can use in ad campaigns, and you don't have to have an expensive photo shoot. You don't have to pay for a photographer because it's all rendered CGI kind of stuff. And of course, they don't get sick and they don't look like they drank too much last night. Whatever. This is stock material now, and so as a result you can put the clothing on them that you would have put on a model and take a photo shoot and put it in a clothes catalog, but at a small fraction of the cost, obviously, and also none of the headaches, more importantly. So I mean, this is astonishing because it doesn't have to be just stills. I mean, they can render this now as video. They can have these imaginary models walk down an imaginary runway or walk through a music video or whatever. It's fascinating stuff. So the trend of augmenting work, we start by saying, these AIs are going to augment the job that people are already doing, and of course, they may take on tasks that people have already done, or they're taking on the work that nobody did before because it was not possible to do before. And as I said, it's very much the case that this can impact workflows, and companies would have to do new things or rethink the way that things are being done so that individual marketing people might get stretched. They might find themselves, first of all, on product teams, project teams with people in other organizations as the silos are knocked down. But it might also come to the point where what you're learning is that you wind up doing a significantly different job a couple of years from now as more and more AI is being pulled into the organization and new kinds of marketing activities are being done that weren't being done before. And a great deal of the stuff that was done before is now being handled by AI. So it's obviously a good time to start learning the obvious thing, how to dance with the robots. That is, learning how to work with the tools that are encroaching on your specialization. Or maybe you have to rethink specialization altogether. In other words, 2 or 3 years from now, if you're a person whose background has been social media marketing or email marketing or something, it might be that in a couple of years, you don't want to be bounded by that. You want to have other new kinds of skills that you're knowledgeable about. The first one being working closely with AIs that augment what human beings can do in email marketing and social media marketing, for example. But ultimately, you might have to move into some other area, some other set of skills. And so those kinds of labels that you might use to say, this is what I do as a marketer, may be completely obsoleted. And it doesn't mean that you won't have some work to do. It just means that the work you're doing may be significantly different, and it might not even have the word marketing associated with it. It will be some new term of art that we use to represent what it is that is going on in the future. But honestly, we might not even have those words yet. So I can't even say to you, think about doing this. The first thing you should do is think about learning about dancing with the robots and what's involved with that, and get up to speed on that as soon as you can. But it does mean that you should rethink the fundamental notion of being specialized, because rather than saying the thing that distinguishes human beings from machines is our ability to be creative, what you might want to say is the thing that might distinguish us from machines is our ability to learn new things and to adapt to a changing world. So, and the last thing I want to draw your attention to is, because of a lot of factors here, the fact that we're going to be relying on new kinds of data, new volumes of data, and the cross association of that with other information that the company may already have, or new sources of information, like, for example, in a retail food chain, you might have all kinds of data of what people look at and then don't buy in the stores, which is a kind of information that retail food chains haven't had historically. They know what people buy, and they know what things are put on the shelves, but they don't know what things people take off the shelves, look at, and put back, for example. But data like that now is going to be accessible to us, and so it suggests all kinds of new things that companies can do, offers they can make to get someone to actually put that box of granola into their shopping cart and not just put it back on the shelf. But it also opens up questions of ethics. Like, we have all this data, and we have a new way of using it in order to engage in different ways with people. But we'll have to institute ethics that says, fundamentally, how should we use this data, and how should we engage people now that we have more information and different sorts of information than we've ever had before? So we're going to need to develop new principles to guide and channel, on one hand, the goals of the companies, and to balance them with the rights, desires, and wants of customers. And of course, there's growing discussion about where the regulatory boundaries ought to be drawn and what is going to be legitimate here in the European Union or specifically Germany or specifically California versus somewhere else that might have more lax notions. So it argues that we have to have an expanding sense of morality that will be big enough and powerful enough and transparent enough that it could match the exponential shift into AI that is coming. And so knowing what we know about what's gone on in recent years in the internet and the kinds of things that have happened in a world that has sort of been dominated by large technology vendors who are largely self-regulating, and the controversies and scandals and data breaches and so on that we've seen in recent years suggest that we'll have to do something more than just allow the corporations that are doing these sorts of things to regulate themselves. So there has to be a really good sense of boundaries and balance of all these different areas. What the company is trying to achieve, what people want, and what the governmental agencies will hammer out in order to allow a marketplace for these things to exist, but for them not to pass over certain notions of morality. So the interesting thing is that those that are most committed today to pushing the boundaries of AI in business, they will also be the first to encounter the boundaries of our ethics as well. So this also suggests, yes, certain companies, large businesses, technology businesses, telecom, large retailers, large logistics companies, they're the ones that are investing the most time and energy now. But across all industries, the core group, the people that are likely to encounter these boundaries of our ethics first, will be the people who are in the core operational groups of the company. And the most core, according to all the research I've looked at, the most core is sales and marketing. So you, the people listening to this, are likely to be in a situation that you are going to be the people at the vanguard, at the front lines of this new set of ethics. And obviously that means the toe stubs, the mistakes that are going to be made are most likely to be made there. So to sum this up and to start the questions flowing, I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning. You, marketers, and all of us as digital consumers living in this modern world, just as people who are moving into this fourth industrial revolution and the role of AI in it, we should brace ourselves for the roller coaster ride ahead. Thank you, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you so much. We have some great questions, so I'll go ahead and get started for both of you. So this one, Stowe, is from Juan, and he has a couple of questions. So the first one is, how accurate is AI concerning client segmentation? And do you want me to let you answer that and then proceed to the other one?
Sure.
Great.
Well, I mean, AI is a general technology. It's not a tool itself. It's not a particular tool designed to do a specific thing. And so, the reality is, there's a growing commonality in how AI-based solutions are built. They're using common open source components, largely the ones that have been built and released into the world by the big technology companies like Google and Microsoft and Facebook and so on. And so people get to start with those building blocks, and then with those, then they can develop a particular application by training an AI with certain kinds of data, tagging what is being seen in a video, or looking at 100 million X-rays and learning how to determine if someone has a broken leg or not. So the reality is that how well AI applications work is a function of how good is the data sets and the learning algorithms that they have to get good at something. So the general rule of thumb is, the more data you have, the better the predictions that will be coming out of the AI applications. But there's increasingly there's increasing research and development of algorithms that are doing better at learning with smaller data sets. So we're seeing all kinds of advances, but ultimately still it comes down to with an issue of like, how smart is your fundamental AI technology and how good is the data that you're feeding it in order to get it to be able to recognize, for example, cancer in people's x-rays. And then, you can improve it over time by adding more data and getting it smarter at what it does. So, the answer is, in a sense, I'll turn it back. It's a question of how good is the data that you feed it.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Juan is also wondering about your thoughts on the dehumanization of customer service. So do you have a sense of what customers are saying or feedback, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, AI plays in that space in many different ways. And of course, I used the 3 different examples. One is, yes, it could be dehumanized if in fact you have a relatively stupid chatbot, for example, that isn't very knowledgeable and doesn't really cover the cases of actual user concerns, the people that are trying to get in touch with a company to complain about their, the lamp they're trying to put together that they bought. And if it's badly developed, then it is totally dehumanizing, and customers will be upset. On the other hand, if it's tireless and smart and does a really good job of covering every possible use case, it could in fact be, rather than dehumanizing, it could be superhumanizing. In other words, I've been through a lot of examples of talking with customer support people and finding out relatively quickly they have no idea how to deal with a particular problem that I'm encountering, for example, with some software that I'm using or something, because they're not particularly knowledgeable. They're not super experts. They're just customer support people that have been somewhat trained. And at some point they say, I don't know, I'll have to, take a support ticket and send it to our engineering team or something. And so, in this case, it's potentially the case that they might be replaced, and that would be okay with me if, in fact, I got the actual answer to the problem I had. And the last point is, looking at how AI would actually change the world of how people are hired and trained to be customer support people. There's a lot of AI that's been used in recent years to use a personality index to try to figure out who are the right people to do customer support. So I remember there was one of these studies I read and said they discovered that people that are good at customer support are very curious, but are not particularly empathetic. Now that struck me as odd, but when they explained it, it makes sense. They're interested in the problem and they want to take the problem apart, but they're not really motivated to make the person who's on the phone with them happy. Their purpose is to try to solve the problem as quickly as possible. And then if something goes sideways, they can say, well, I'll send that off to, a senior person will get a ticket on that, and they can hang up the phone and they don't feel bad. It doesn't hurt their mood that they weren't able to answer it. Anyway, it turns out to be kind of interesting, so that not just in customer support, but across the board, AI might be actually a major impact, have a major impact on how people are hired into organizations in a way that potentially anyway could skirt a lot of the human biases that people inevitably bring to the question of, should we hire this person for this job or not? Yes, there's been some bad examples in the past where it turns out that programs, embody the biases that are, embedded in the history of hiring in a company already. But that's something that could be fixed. In other words, I have great hopes that, the biases that we cannot get out of people's heads is something we might avoid putting into AI that's helping to choose who should have, a job, for example, in customer service or not. So we'll have to see about that.
All right, great. Thank you for that detailed response. So we have Mike here who is curious about the process that is recommended for assembling and profiling online and offline customer data so that the capabilities of AI and ML can determine behavioral relevant marketing messages.
Well, honestly, at that level of granularity, I think you'll have to go talk to people that are offering products that actually do things like that. Because I could address it sort of in general as a anthropologist of the future, right? But I'm not an AI practitioner. I'm not somebody that's building these tools. My orientation is really sort of about the large scale impacts it's having on the world, and in particular on the work that marketers are going to do. I can't advise somebody on the nuts and bolts of how to do a specific project like that.
All right, understood. And from your point of view, is AI for marketing, best understood as a way to save costs?
Well, I think there's a problem that we'll see this sort of alternative world, which is a lot of particular senior management might approach it with the notion of let's do this with the intention of cutting costs, and that largely means we'll figure out how to program some AI apps to automate business processes in the business, and then we'll be able to cut our marketing staff, for example, by 20%. And so yes, we'll have to invest $1 million, but at the end of the year 2, we'll be netting hundreds of thousands of dollars a month or whatever it is. And I think that's something you'll hear in a lot of organizations, but those are generally the ones I believe are not going to make sufficient kinds of investments to actually think about growing exponentially into the application of AI across the board with the intention of finding new opportunities. And in fact, what I think you'll see is in the companies that are most aggressively chasing AI as a fundamental opportunity for the future is that they're actually spending more money. They're making a strategic investment so that they can get that exponential bang out in the 3rd year or whatever, after they've got their critical mass of knowledge and staffing built up. And only then can they spread it out across the company and start seeing their top line growing dramatically instead of thinking about bottom line savings. So I think the reality is the companies that will be most likely to take advantage of these opportunities and go somewhere significant with them are ones that will be thinking at the other end of the spectrum, which is about new opportunities as opposed to cutting old costs.
All right, great. And so we have Stephen who's wondering, what tools do you advise to start looking at that will let us take advantage of AI?
Well, the problem is you really have to start relatively low on the stack.
Right.
So here's the alternatives. There's a fundamental fork in the road, and I think companies should do both of these things. All right. One is there's a lot of technologies that you've already heavily invested in. Large scale enterprise tools. So that might be CRM tools. It might be marketing tools. It could be coordination and collaboration tools. It might be tools that you use in your ERP solutions, so on, depending on what kind of company you are. And all of the major vendors in that space are investing heavily to embed AI into those products. So if you're using, for example, a large-scale project management tool, let's say you're a professional services firm, and you're managing lots and lots of information about, your 10,000, professional consultants, and you've got 10,000 projects going at any given time. Nowadays, people who have solutions that can help you manage that are building AI into the tools to help you understand in real time the challenges and changes and threats that are going on in your business. And they will offer those solutions to you, and they are actively promoting, their solutions to help you solve problems that you might be dealing with now manually with people with green eye shades, doing risk assessment, but it could be done by AI. So what will happen is you'll go down that path. So that's one side. You'll start seeing a lot of embedded AI in enterprise applications of every stripe. On the other side, companies that want to be able to roll their own ultimately are going to have to invest in getting way down in the stack and hiring people that really understand how to build AI with increasingly more user-friendly tools, but ultimately being able to build things that are, perhaps the perfect solution to your specific business that isn't perfectly overlapping with what you might be getting in these enterprise software solutions. And so the companies, I think, that are going to do best will be pursuing these two fronts in parallel, and they'll get the near-term benefits quickly from picking enterprise software solutions that have AI increasingly built in. And on the other hand, they have to invest in figuring out how can we build our own platform, our own stack of technology and knowledge and understanding about it, and then use that to potentially transform the way our business operates. So you'll see them doing both at once.
All right. We have a little bit of time left to get to a couple more questions. Thank you so much to everyone for submitting these great questions. So we have one from Jonathan, and he would like to know, what are some of the skills that we should cultivate as marketers to be able to collaborate with instead of being replaced by AI?
Well, I mean, at the highest possible level, the fundamental skills should be the skills of using the tools today that, for example, as I said, enterprise software vendors, people that are selling you marketing solutions that you're using to support, augment, and to some extent automate what you're doing in marketing, increasingly they're going to be biting off more and more of aspects of what you can do and automating those kinds of things. So the example I used earlier, the one of being able to get to the point where you have a solution that's actually capable of offering to a specific user in real time some kind of tailored, hyper segmented offering that says, this guy today, based on what he was doing on our website, we should ask him to pay $111 for this product, which is normally $150, for the following reasons, whatever the rationale is that the AI came up with, based on the understanding of that tool from 10,000 other offers it's made to people like this. So learning how to work with tools like that so they can get smart and do that is going to be the first challenge for marketeers. And it depends on what kind of company you are. That company that I'm envisioning is some kind of retail company that's trying to sell things to people on the internet. But if you're not that kind of company, if you're a product, you're manufacturing those products that other people are trying to sell, it's a different set of capabilities, but it has to do with trying to figure out which product should we bring to market based on some analysis of what your competitors are building and so on. Once again, you have some set of tools that you're using today to do that. Go out and talk to your vendors and find out what kind of capabilities they are building in, or what kind of capabilities you want them to build in so that you can do things differently, more expeditiously, and so on. I think that's the area of sort of the quickest turnaround of real benefits to the company. But once again, I don't think that companies should say, okay, we'll do that first, and then later on, we'll do this other stuff. We won't have to invest right away in trying to hire our own data engineers and ML guys. No, I think you have to do them both.
All right. I'm actually wondering, and we've had a couple of audience members ask this, what are, based on your experience, what are some of the top AI safety concerns when it comes to marketing?
Well, once again, it goes back to this question. You're amassing all this stuff based on some sort of data. First of all, where does the data come from? We know all kinds of horror stories of people that bought all kinds of data from sources that were doing it by scraping Facebook, for example, and who knows what else, So, first you have to really know the sort of history and provenance of the data that you're theoretically working with. And then if it's your own data that you're collecting from customers or potential customers, or somebody else's customers, by sort of observing people, for example, talking about products in the marketplace, you have to sit down and make sure you figure out what your ethics are and how are you going to treat this data. And then if some part of the data that you have is something that is sensitive, then you have to make sure you have the right kinds of data protection in place, so that you don't have all this information captured in, next thing you know, 500 million records of users of Marriott customers have their data stolen by some group in Russia, and who knows what the hell they're going to do with that information once they've got it. It's got people's credit card data, for example. So I think it's absolutely essential that people put the checks and balances in place, the hard grounding of the most rigid and reliable kinds of security in place. Obviously, I take that as a given. But then also you have to explicitly talk about and codify what your company policies are about how to use information and so on. And it has to be very explicit. You're going to make sure that you have to put the sort of the auditing into place to make sure that people are actually following those rules. And all of a sudden you don't have some horrible thing blow up in your face.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, and then I promise, Joe, I'll give you a break. But the last question for today's presentation, we had an audience member ask, which AI technologies do you think are most or least likely to successfully get to the scaling stage?
Well, I've been looking at the numbers recently of actual robots, physical robots, and the ordering of more physical robots, particularly the kind that are used in manufacturing and logistics fulfillment centers and so on, the ones that drag around pallets of goods that wind up being delivered by JD.com or Amazon or whatever. The numbers of those are really staggering. So they are scaling already. The ability to generate a bunch more robots is sort of unbounded, and the capacity of the world to produce enough and meet demand is obviously pretty clear. So the numbers are growing, but there's no stopping scaling there. I think the same is true with a lot of what we're seeing is rapid amount of innovation in very narrowly focused domains. For example, the examples I gave earlier, that music is an area that's really well understood, and people have been using AI to analyze and then generate music for years, but now it's commercially available, and so you can go to a company like that and say, give me 10,000 new songs that sound like something that would sell that would be good in an ad for body lotion. And it's romance, and it's, you know, candles and candlelight, and roses, rose petals in the bathtub. And, you know, they'll add those tags into the mix, and you'll get, you know, 1,000 new cuts to pick from. And so it's capable of scaling, in a sense, to as fine-grained, you know, a target that you have in mind, based on our understanding of how emotion and music are connected. So those kinds of, you know, a narrowly focused domain like that, it can scale, you know, and everybody in the world could, in fact, get all of the ad music they could possibly want for significantly less money and probably better results than could be done any other way. The negative of that, of course, is the musicians who have been making a living, you know, creating those jingles, for example, are now going to have to figure out some other way to make a living. But I'm saying it scales. Those narrowly defined areas scale immensely. The thing that we don't have is, you know, more general intelligence that you could just throw monstrously complicated problems at and say, here, figure out my product mix for the next 5 years for me. You know, I mean, it's too general, too vague, too many variables. There's no general intelligence yet. So things have to be narrowly focused in order to scale.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your insight. We're very grateful to have you, as well as to the Sprinklr team. I do also want to thank our audience for their participation, their awesome questions that they submitted. I loved seeing all of the interaction in the chat. And I want to remind our audience that this recording will be available on demand shortly. So please feel free to review and take additional notes. And the Sprinklr team will also be sending out follow-up communication with webcast details. So again, please look out for that. And I wish everyone a great rest of your day. Thank you so much again.